The morning sun peeked through the pink curtains of 7-year-old Sarah Chen's bedroom. She sat up in her bed, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, watching dust particles dance in the golden light. Unlike other children who would jump out of bed making noise, Sarah remained quiet, just as she had been for the past 3 years. From her room, she could hear her mother, Linda, in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The familiar sound of eggs cracking against the bowl and the whisk beating them filled the air. Her father, Michael, was probably reading his morning newspaper, and her 12-year-old brother Tommy would be rushing to finish his homework from the night before. Sarah picked up her notebook from her bedside table and wrote in neat handwriting, "Good morning, Mr. Elephant." She smiled at her toy, knowing it would keep her secrets safe. What her family didn't know was that Sarah could hear everything perfectly. Every whisper, every late-night conversation, every worried discussion about her future, she heard it all. She walked to her closet and chose her clothes for the day, a blue dress with white polka dots and her favorite white shoes. Sarah was very particular about dressing herself, something that made her mother both proud and sad. Linda often told visitors, "She's so independent. Our little Sarah, she has to be." Downstairs, Sarah could hear her parents talking in hushed tones. "Did you schedule her new doctor's appointment?" her father asked, trying to keep his voice low. "Yes, next Tuesday at 4 p.m., her mother replied with a sigh. "Dr. Patterson says he might have a new approach to help her speak." Sarah wrote in her notebook, "Doctor appointment number 24. She had kept count of every visit, every specialist, every test. None of them had found anything physically wrong with her vocal cords or brain, because there was nothing wrong. She simply chose not to speak. Tommy burst into the kitchen, his backpack half open. "Mom, I can't find my math homework." "Inside your science textbook, where you left it last night," Sarah thought to herself, smiling as she walked down the stairs. Sure enough, moments later, Tommy found it exactly there. "Sarah, sweetheart." Linda's face lit up as she saw her daughter. "What would you like for breakfast? Point to what you want." She gestured to the options on the counter: cereal, eggs, or toast. Sarah pointed to the cereal, then held up 2 fingers, her way of asking for 2 slices of toast as well. She sat at the table, watching her family's morning routine unfold. Her father lowered his newspaper and smiled at her. "Sleep well, princess?" he asked. Sarah nodded, giving him a thumbs up. She pulled out her small whiteboard, one of many scattered throughout the house, and wrote, "Had a dream about butterflies." "That's wonderful, honey," Michael said, but Sarah caught the flash of pain in his eyes. She knew how much he missed hearing her voice, how he still kept a video on his phone from 4 years ago, where she was singing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." As they ate breakfast, Sarah observed everything. She noticed how her mother's hand trembled slightly when pouring orange juice, thinking about the upcoming doctor's appointment. She saw how Tommy kept glancing at her, trying to be a protective big brother. She watched her father check his watch repeatedly, worried about being late for work, but not wanting to rush the family moment. What they didn't realize was that Sarah's silence gave her a special power. People spoke freely around her, thinking she was lost in her own world, but she absorbed everything, understood everything. She knew about her parents' financial worries over her medical bills. She knew Tommy sometimes cried in his room because kids at school made fun of his weird sister. She knew her mother blamed herself, wondering if something during pregnancy had caused this. As the family prepared to leave for school and work, Sarah hugged each of them tightly. She had her reasons for staying silent, reasons she wasn't ready to share. For now, she would continue watching, listening, and keeping her notebook filled with the truths nobody knew she understood, because sometimes, she had learned, silence speaks louder than words. In her backpack, along with her school supplies, she carried her special notebook, the one where she wrote down everything she heard, everything she saw, everything she wished she could say. Today would be just another day of being the silent observer in a family that desperately wanted to hear her voice, not knowing that her silence was her way of protecting them all. The Chen family's house looked like any other home from the outside, but inside it was different. Whiteboards hung on every wall, and colorful sticky notes covered the refrigerator. This was how they had learned to talk with Sarah over the past 3 years. Linda Chen stood in the living room, moving her hands in careful patterns as she practiced the new sign language she had learned. She wanted to surprise Sarah with some new signs she had picked up from her evening classes. 3 times a week, after finishing her work at the local bank, Linda would drive across town to attend sign language lessons. "You're getting really good at that," Michael said, watching his wife from the doorway. He felt guilty that he hadn't learned as much sign language as Linda. Instead, he had filled the house with whiteboards, notebooks, and drawing pads. Every room had its own communication station, as he liked to call them. Sarah sat on the couch, pretending to read her book, but her eyes followed her mother's hand movements carefully. She already knew all these signs. She had learned them secretly by watching videos online during computer class at school. But she never let anyone know this. She smiled at her mother's dedication, writing on her whiteboard, "Good job, Mom." Tommy rushed down the stairs, holding his science project, a model of the solar system. "Mom, Dad, the paint won't dry in time for tomorrow's presentation." Sarah quickly wrote on her board, "Use the hairdryer." Tommy's face lit up. "Sarah, you're a genius." He grabbed the hairdryer from the bathroom and carefully dried his project. This was typical of their relationship. Sarah might not speak, but she was always helping her brother with clever solutions. Later that evening, during dinner, the family had settled into their usual routine. Linda had made spaghetti, Sarah's favorite. They had learned that Sarah liked to twirl the noodles exactly 3 times before taking a bite. These little patterns and habits had become part of their family's rhythm. "Mrs. Rodriguez asked about you today," Tommy told Sarah as he passed the garlic bread. "She said you're doing really well in art class." Sarah nodded, drawing a quick sketch of a flower on her dinner whiteboard to show her appreciation. Art had become her favorite subject. It was somewhere she could express herself without needing words. Michael watched his children interact, remembering how different things had been before Sarah stopped speaking. He thought about the day it happened, right after her 4th birthday. There had been no warning, no explanation. She simply stopped talking one morning and hadn't spoken since. The doctors had run every test they could think of, but found nothing wrong. Tomorrow's family day at school, Linda reminded everyone, trying to keep her voice cheerful. "Sarah, do you want to help me bake cookies for your class?" Sarah's eyes lit up, and she nodded enthusiastically. She wrote on her board, "Chocolate chip with rainbow sprinkles?" "Of course, sweetie. Whatever you want," Linda agreed, sharing a look with Michael. These were the moments that hurt the most, seeing their daughter so excited, so full of life, but unable to hear her voice. Tommy started clearing the dishes, accidentally dropping a spoon. The loud clatter made everyone jump, and Sarah's reaction caught their attention. She had covered her ears a split second before the spoon fell, almost as if she had known it was going to happen. Michael and Linda exchanged glances, but said nothing. They had noticed these little things before, how Sarah sometimes responded to sounds before they happened, how she would move out of the way before someone turned a corner, how she seemed to know things she shouldn't possibly know. That night, as Sarah got ready for bed, she heard her parents talking in their room. They thought she couldn't hear them from down the hall, but she could. "Did you see how she covered her ears before the spoon fell?" Linda whispered. "Maybe it's just good reflexes," Michael suggested, but he sounded uncertain. Sarah opened her special notebook, the one she kept hidden under her mattress. In it, she wrote, "Day 1095 of silence. Mom and Dad are starting to notice things. Tommy dropped the spoon today. I need to be more careful. I can't let them know yet. Not until I'm sure they're ready for the truth." She closed the notebook and hugged her elephant tight. Tomorrow would be another day of watching, listening, and keeping her secret. But soon, very soon, things would have to change. The truth was getting harder to hide, and Sarah wasn't sure how much longer she could protect her family by staying silent. Saturday mornings at Grandmother Chen's house were special. While most children would be watching cartoons, Sarah sat in her grandmother's sunny living room, surrounded by the smell of jasmine tea and fresh-baked cookies. Today was different, though. Today, Sarah had brought her secret notebook. Grandmother Chen, whom everyone called Nai Nai, was watering her collection of plants when Sarah arrived with her parents and Tommy. Unlike the other adults, Nai Nai never tried to make Sarah speak. She simply accepted her granddaughter as she was, which made Sarah feel safe. "Ah, my little butterfly is here," Nai Nai said warmly, using her special nickname for Sarah. She noticed the worn notebook clutched tightly in Sarah's hands, but didn't mention it. Instead, She went to her kitchen and brought out a plate of moon cookies, Sarah's favorite. While the adults gathered in the kitchen to talk, Sarah settled into her usual spot by the window. Tommy was busy playing video games on his phone. This was her chance. She opened her notebook and began to write. March 15th, 10:23 a.m. Dad is worried about the mortgage payment. He whispered to Mom in the car that they might need to borrow money from Nai. Mom doesn't want to, but the medical bills are too high. Sarah's hand moved quickly across the page. Her gift wasn't just hearing things. She could remember every conversation word for word, like a human recorder. She wrote down everything, the exact time, the exact words, even the way people's voices changed when they spoke. 10:24 a.m. Tommy told his friend Jack on the phone yesterday that he's embarrassed about the family day presentation. He doesn't want his friends to know about me not talking. As she wrote, Sarah didn't notice Nai watching her from the doorway. The old woman's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as she observed her granddaughter's intense concentration. 10:30 a.m. Mom is telling Nai about the new doctor. She's crying in the kitchen. She says, "We tried everything, Mom. What if she never speaks again?" Nai tells her that some flowers take longer to bloom, but they are often the most beautiful. Sarah paused her writing when she heard footsteps. She quickly closed her notebook, but not before Nai had seen the neat rows of handwriting. This wasn't the messy scribbling of a 7-year-old. These were detailed records, perfectly organized by date and time. Later that afternoon, while everyone else was busy helping in the garden, Nai sat down next to Sarah. She placed a small, carved wooden box on the table between them. "When I was young," Nai began, her voice soft, "I knew a girl who could hear things others couldn't. She kept secrets too, just like you." She tapped Sarah's notebook gently. Sarah's eyes widened. Her hands trembled as she reached for her whiteboard, but Nai shook her head. "No need for that, little butterfly. I understand more than you think." She opened the wooden box, revealing an old, leather-bound journal. This was hers. She wrote down everything she heard, just like you do. Sarah's heart beat faster. For the first time in 3 years, she felt understood. She opened her notebook and wrote, "You know?" Nai nodded. "Some gifts are too big for little shoulders to carry alone. That girl with the gift, she was my sister, your great-aunt Min." Sarah wrote quickly. "What happened to her?" "She carried too many secrets for too long," Nai replied, her eyes sad. "But you, my little butterfly, don't have to make the same choice. Sometimes protecting people means telling the truth, not keeping it hidden." From the garden, they could hear Tommy laughing as he helped their father with the plants. Their mother was taking pictures, calling out poses. Normal family moments that Sarah recorded faithfully in her notebook. "When you're ready," Nai said, placing the wooden box in Sarah's lap, "read your great-aunt's journal. But remember, your gift is meant to help, not to hide." Sarah hugged her grandmother tightly, tears rolling down her cheeks. For the first time since she chose silence, she felt less alone. As she held the box containing her great-aunt's journal, she realized that her gift wasn't just hearing things, it was understanding them. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to help her family understand too. She opened to a fresh page in her notebook and wrote, "Day 1096. Today, Nai showed me I'm not alone. Maybe it's time to tell the truth." Miss Parker, the new school psychologist, sat in her office reviewing Sarah Chen's file. Something about this case didn't add up. She watched through her office window as Sarah played in the schoolyard during recess, noticing how the little girl would move away from areas seconds before a ball would land there, or turn to help a falling child before they even stumbled. "There's nothing wrong with her hearing," Ms. Parker muttered, flipping through test results. "In fact, everything suggests her hearing is exceptional." She picked up her phone and called Sarah's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Could you send Sarah to my office?" she asked. "And please, don't tell her why." 10 minutes later, Sarah walked into the office, clutching her ever-present notebook. Miss Parker noticed how the girl's eyes quickly scanned the room, taking in every detail. "Hello, Sarah. Please, sit down." Miss Parker smiled warmly. She had prepared for this meeting carefully, setting up a simple test. On her desk, she had placed a timer that would ring in exactly 3 minutes. She hadn't told anyone about it. Sarah sat down, pulling out her whiteboard. But before she could write anything, Miss Parker spoke again. You might want to cover your ears in about 10 seconds, she said calmly. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Then, exactly as Ms. Parker had predicted, she covered her ears just before the timer rang loudly. Just as I thought, Ms. Parker said softly. You can hear more than just normal sounds, can't you, Sarah? Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her whiteboard. She wrote quickly, Please don't tell my parents. I need to understand what's happening, Ms. Parker replied. Will you help me? Sarah hesitated, then opened her notebook. She flipped to a page and showed it to Ms. Parker. The psychologist's eyes widened as she read the detailed notes, including conversations that had happened in her office earlier that day. Conversations Sarah couldn't possibly have heard from her classroom. You hear everything, Ms. Parker whispered. Not just nearby sounds, but everything in the building. Sarah nodded slowly. She wrote on her whiteboard. And more. Sometimes too much more. Meanwhile, in the school hallway, Tommy was heading to the bathroom when he passed by Ms. Parker's office. He heard his sister's name and stopped. Through the partially open door, he could see Sarah showing something to the psychologist. When did this start? Ms. Parker asked. Sarah wrote. After the accident, the one everyone thinks I don't remember. Tommy's heart skipped a beat. The accident. The one from 3 years ago that no one talked about, the day everything changed. Back in the office, Ms. Parker was beginning to understand. Is that why you stopped talking? Because you started hearing too much? Sarah nodded again, tears forming in her eyes. She wrote, Words are too loud now. Everyone's thoughts, feelings, secrets, they're all so loud. Tommy couldn't move from his spot by the door. His sister's words on the whiteboard made him remember that day. The screeching tires, the crash, the secrets the adults whispered in the hospital when they thought no one could hear. Ms. Parker leaned forward. Sarah, you need help managing this gift. Keeping silent isn't the answer. But Sarah was already shaking her head. She wrote frantically. They're not ready for the truth. About the accident, about what really happened. What I heard. What truth? Miss Parker asked gently. Before Sarah could write her answer, Tommy stumbled backward, knocking over a chair in the hallway. Sarah jumped up, knowing her brother had heard everything. Tommy ran, his footsteps echoing through the hall. Sarah grabbed her notebook and rushed after him, leaving Miss Parker calling their names. In her rush, Sarah dropped a piece of paper. Miss Parker picked it up and read the words written in Sarah's neat handwriting. The accident wasn't an accident. I heard them plan it. That's why I had to stop talking, because some truths are too dangerous to speak. Miss Parker sat down heavily in her chair, realizing that she had just opened a door that couldn't be closed. Somewhere in the school, a brother and sister were about to confront a truth that had been buried for 3 years, and nothing would ever be the same again. Tommy ran all the way to the school playground, his heart pounding. He could hear Sarah's quick footsteps behind him, but he didn't stop. Finding a quiet spot behind the big oak tree, he finally turned to face his sister. All this time, he said, his voice shaking, you could hear everything. Every single thing? Sarah pulled out her notebook with trembling hands. She wrote, Yes, everything, including what you whisper to your pillow at night when you cry about me. Tommy's face went pale. He slid down to sit on the ground, his back against the tree. The accident, he whispered. You wrote that it wasn't really an accident. What did you mean? Sarah sat next to her brother, opening her notebook to a section marked with a red tab. The pages were worn, as if they had been read many times. She showed him the entry dated 3 years ago. Tommy read slowly. March 10th, 2021, 2:15 p.m. Uncle Peter talking to strange man behind garage. Says dad must pay for what he did. Says accident will look real. Nobody will know. Uncle Peter? Tommy's voice cracked. But he was the one who got hurt in the accident. He's been in a wheelchair ever since. Sarah nodded, writing quickly. The plan went wrong. They wanted to hurt Dad, but Uncle Peter got hurt instead. That's when everything changed. That's when I started hearing everything. Tommy remembered that day. They had been driving to the park when their car's brakes failed. Uncle Peter, who was visiting, had been in the passenger seat. The car had crashed into a tree. Everyone survived, but Uncle Peter's legs were permanently damaged. Does Dad know? Tommy asked. Sarah shook her head, writing, Nobody knows except me. I heard Uncle Peter talking to his wife in the hospital. He said he could never tell the truth now. Said it was his punishment for trying to hurt his own brother. Tommy stood up suddenly, grabbing Sarah's notebook. We have to show Mom and Dad. We have to tell them. But Sarah snatched the notebook back, her eyes wide with fear. She wrote frantically, "We can't. Uncle Peter is watching our family. I hear him on the phone sometimes. He still wants revenge." "Is that why you stopped talking?" Tommy asked, finally understanding. "To protect Dad." Sarah nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. She wrote, "If I talked, I might say something by mistake. It's safer to stay silent." Just then, their mother's voice called across the playground. "Tommy, Sarah, where are you? It's time to go home." Tommy looked at his sister, seeing her in a completely new way. She wasn't just his mute little sister anymore. She was a protector, carrying a burden too heavy for her young shoulders. "We need help," he said firmly. "We can't handle this alone." Sarah started to shake her head, but Tommy grabbed her hand. "Remember what Nai gave you? Great Aunt Min's journal. Maybe there's something in there that can help us." For the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. She wrote, "After dinner, come to my room. I'll show you everything." As they walked back to their mother, Tommy squeezed Sarah's hand 3 times, their old secret signal from before she stopped talking. Sarah squeezed back 4 times, their code for "I trust you." Linda Chen watched her children approach, noticing something different in the way they walked together. "Everything okay?" she asked. Tommy nodded, trying to act normal. "Yeah, Mom. Sarah was just showing me her new drawings." But Linda noticed Sarah's red eyes and Tommy's serious expression. She saw how tightly they held hands, how they seemed to be sharing a secret. As they got into the car, she called Michael. "Honey," she said quietly, "something's different with the kids. I think we need to talk as a family tonight." Sarah, sitting in the back seat, heard every word. She opened her notebook one last time that afternoon and wrote, "The truth is coming, ready or not." The Chen family dinner table had never felt so tense. Linda had made Sarah's favorite dumplings, but the food remained mostly untouched. Michael kept checking his phone, waiting for a call from the new doctor about Sarah's test results. Tommy couldn't stop looking at his sister, who was writing something in her notebook under the table. "I got a call from Ms. Parker today," Linda said carefully, breaking the silence. "She said something happened at school." Sarah's pencil stopped moving. Tommy dropped his fork. "She wouldn't give me details," Linda continued, "but she suggested we all need to talk, as a family." Michael put down his phone. "What's going on? Tommy, Sarah?" Before either child could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the window, they could see Uncle Peter's wheelchair on the front porch. Linda stood to answer the door, but Sarah suddenly jumped up, knocking over her glass of water. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Michael asked, startled by his daughter's unusual behavior. Sarah grabbed her tablet, typing faster than she ever had before. Her fingers flew across the screen as she finally broke her silence in the only way she could. The message appeared in large letters. "Don't let him in. He's here to hurt Daddy, just like he tried 3 years ago." The room froze. Linda's hand stopped halfway to the doorbell. Michael stared at the tablet, reading the words over and over. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. Sarah typed again. "I hear everything king. Always heavy. The accident PWASNT and ACSTIDNT. Uncle Peter planned it." The doorbell rang again. Tommy stood up, moving closer to his sister. "It's true, Dad. Sarah showed me the proof. She's been protecting you all this time." Michael's face went pale. "Linda, don't open that door." Sarah was typing again. "He's on the phone right now, telling someone he's going to he started." As if to confirm her words, they could hear Uncle Peter's voice through the door, talking on his phone. "Yes, I'm here now. It ends tonight." Linda backed away from the door, her hands shaking. Michael called the police. But Sarah was already shaking her head, typing frantically. "He has FRINDS in the police. IV, heard his TLOs. We need NAI. Tommy ran to get the house phone, dialing their grandmother's number. Meanwhile, Sarah opened her notebook, showing her parents page after page of recorded conversations, dates, times, and plans she had overheard over the years. Michael read through the notes, his face growing darker with each page. The company, the money he lost. He blamed me all this time? The pounding on the door grew louder. Michael, open up, we need to talk. Sarah typed again. I stopped TLKing because I was afraid I'd say something wrong. Afraid HED hurt US if he knew I could he king. Linda pulled her daughter close, tears streaming down her face. Oh, my brave, brave girl, you've been carrying this all alone. Not anymore, Tommy said firmly, returning from his call. Nine Eyes on her way, and she's bringing help. Through the window, they could see Uncle Peter getting more agitated. 3 days after Uncle Peter's arrest, the Chen family sat in Nine Eyes' living room. FBI agents had spent hours interviewing everyone, but they were especially interested in Sarah's notebooks. The detailed records she had kept over 3 years became the key evidence in their case. So many conversations, Agent Wilson had said, carefully turning the pages. Dates, times, exact words. It's incredible. Now, surrounded by the comfort of Nine Eyes' house, Sarah sat with Great Aunt Min's journal open in her lap. Tommy sat next to her, reading over her shoulder. Their parents watched from the couch, still trying to process everything that had happened. Read it out loud, Nine Eyes said gently. It's time for your voice to return, little butterfly. Sarah's hands trembled as she touched the old pages. For the first time in 3 years, she opened her mouth to speak. Her voice came out scratchy from lack of use, but clear. Dear Diary, she read slowly, today I heard too much again. The neighbors are fighting about money. The mailman is worried about his sick daughter. My brother's friend is planning to steal from our store. Sometimes I wish I could turn off my ears. Linda began to cry softly as she heard her daughter's voice. Michael held her hand tightly, his own eyes wet with tears. Great Aunt Min had the same gift, Nine Eye explained. She could hear everything, just like Sarah, but she chose a different path. She kept everything inside until it made her sick. Sarah looked up from the journal. She died young, didn't she? Her voice was getting stronger with each word. Nine Eye nodded. Yes, the burden of too many secrets was too heavy for her heart. That's why I knew I had to help you, Sarah. 1 month had passed since the day Sarah spoke again. Spring had arrived, bringing cherry blossoms to Nine Eyes' garden where the Chen family gathered for their weekly Sunday lunch. The old wooden table was set up under the trees, covered with dishes that filled the air with delicious smells. Sarah sat in her usual spot, but everything else was different now. Her notebook lay